The governors of the People's Democratic Party have questioned the management of Nigeria's oil and gas resources by the federal government. At the end of its meeting in Port Harcourt, the PDP governors lamented the state of insecurity and what it calls a bad economy, urging Nigerians to vote to end the dominance of the All Progressive Congress in 2023. Arise correspondent Remittances George reports.
The flags line up representing state governors of the People's Democratic Party for a meeting in the River State Government House, Port Harcourt. On every occasion, the host, Governor Nyesom Ezewanwike, welcomes his counterparts to the meeting of the PDP Governors Forum. With all present except Godwin Obaseki of Edo and his Abia counterpart, Okezie Ikpazo, the governors walk the short distance to the venue. The national anthem precedes the business of the day with the PDP governors in a closed-door meeting. After about 3 hours, the door opens for the forum to present a communique read by its chairman, Aminu Tambowal.
The governors of the PDP noted the management of our oil and gas resources, the administration of Federation account remittances have remained opaque, confusing, and non-transparent. In addition, the transition to NNPC Limited under the Petroleum Industry Act has not been properly streamlined to ensure that the interests of all the tiers of government are protected consistent with the 1999 Constitution. It is clear that the APC government is a massive failure when compared with the records of PDP in government. The PDP handed over a 550 billion economy, the largest in Africa, in 2015. But under the APC, Nigeria is the poverty capital of the world.
Priding itself with a newfound mission statement of rescuing and rebuilding Nigeria, the PDP talks about the present state of the economy and security in the country.
The meeting lamented the continued state of insecurity in the country, the persistent and ceaseless flow of Nigerians' blood on a daily basis in many parts of Nigeria. The near collapse of security situation in Nigeria is also reviewed. The strategies to confront terrorists, kidnappers, bandits, and other criminals still is a major problem for the APC administration. The Nigerian economy has continued to deteriorate, and Nigerians have become numb and accustomed to bad economic news, as exemplified by the inconsistent and differential exchange rate regime, high interest rates, unsustainable unemployment figures, and borrowing spree, some of which have not been applied to important projects.
From the hydra-headed phenomenon of insecurity to what they call the dwindling economic fortunes of Nigeria, the communique read by the PDP Governors Forum was more of a lamentation, hoping that the change will come for better governance in 2023 when the electorate go out to vote for a change of government. Remittances George, Arise News.
Right. Meanwhile, governors of the All Progressive Congress, APC, say the February date earlier fixed for the National Convention of the party is still sacrosanct and will not change. After an all-night meeting, the governors emerged in the early hours of Monday to inform journalists that the convention will hold in February, despite the crisis and litigations in some state chapters of the party. The APC has been unable to hold a convention and elect new national leaders since its former leadership, led by Adams Oshomole, was sacked in 2020. The party has since been led by an interim management committee led by Yobe State Governor Mai Mala Buni. KB State Governor Atiku Bagudu, who addressed journalists, says the APC caretaker and extraordinary convention planning committee is in the best position to announce the specific date for the convention.
We have agreed and they will announce a date in February, but the announcement comes from the party. It's a party decision. There are other stakeholders that they are consulting, and to show respect and institutional limits, we are not going to overstep our bounds. We also passed a vote of confidence on the National Caretaker and Extraordinary Convention Planning Committee of the party, chaired by Governor Mai Malabuni and including two other governors, among others, Governor Abu Bello of Nasarawa State and Governor Boyega, South Niger, Governor Boyega Oyetola of Osun State, who have done an incredible job of running our party successfully, mobilizing people into the party.
More so, the caretaker chairman, Maimala Buni, yesterday briefed the president at Aso Villa, Abuja, on the plans which will be ratified at today's meeting of the Caretaker and Extraordinary Convention Planning Committee, CECPC. According to reports, the CECPC is holding its 19th regular meeting today. The Caretaker Committee would ratify the timetable for the National Convention, announce the convention dates, and roll out a comprehensive plan for the convention, which will hold in Abuja. A lot to unpack this morning, Tundu.
Well, that was a really balanced report. We're all bang up to date with activities in the ruling party and the main opposition party, PDP. Well, on the PDP governor's communique, I don't think that there's anything surprising there. They highlighted this issue about sort of the dire straits we are in economically, the security situation being completely appalling. And I guess they did what the PDP would do in trying to wrestle power from the ruling party, try to encourage everybody to go out and get their voters' cards, assuming, of course, that they will be voting in their favor. But just the voter drive, voter information drive, for me is timely. And I'm wondering why we're not hearing that from not just the PDP. We should be hearing more of that by now, I would have thought, from the National Orientation Agency. There should be jingles by now. There should be a huge campaign. So I think, yes, it's great that the opposition party is making this call, but I think even the ruling party should be, and more than that, the agency that's charged with that, getting Nigerians to get out there, register to vote, get their PVCs, and make their voices heard in 2023. With regards to APC, yes, there were reports, weren't there, recently, of some wanting the convention to be postponed till June. From what we've heard from the APC governors, that's not going to happen. They really do want to get the show on the road in February next month, because it is quite embarrassing, I have to say, for the ruling party to still be in limbo after all this time. Politically, strategically, it was suggested that they were waiting for PDP to see where PDP would head with regards to their chairman and see where they would zone, then APC will make their move. That will only make sense if the convention does go ahead in February. Any attempts to delay it even further, I think, will be really damaging for the party. Yes, the APC governors had all this praise for the May Malabuni-led interim situation, but you know how I feel about interim situations. They just don't quite cut the mustard, do they? And it's actually a huge failing on the part of the ruling party. So as soon as they can get the convention together and actually elect substantive chairman, we haven't had an APC chairman since Adams Oshomole.
Yeah.
It's really quite unfortunate. Yeah. So I think this idea that it's all going to be concluded in February is a welcome one, and I'm sure it comes as a relief to most people. Now, those who are aggrieved and are urging for postponement in June, I do hope that the reconciliation committees that the APC has established across the country are able to bring them to the table as well, so that the party can really just move on.
Dr. Batu?
Okay, let me start where you left it off. The APC Reconciliation Committee that has been going around the states is not making any significant progress. And this is not a partisan comment. This is based on reports, even by the party itself. In Ogun State, it could not forge, that committee could not forge any reconciliation. In Kwara State, there was similar chaos. In other words, what we're saying is that the APC is troubled. This resolution by 20 out of 26 governors of the APC, I think there are 26, right? APC governors. It's not something that you can rely on because there are court cases. And before that February date, perhaps, something may well happen. Somebody will go to court and get an injunction and say that the convention should not take place. I think that the people who can resolve it are probably, at the end of the day, the leaders of the party. Maybe if the president is able to use his weight to say, look, this is what I want, and he gets the support of other leaders of the party, yes, maybe the convention will go on as has been announced by 20 out of 26 governors. A vote of confidence has been passed in Mai Mala Buni, who is chairman of the Caretaker Extraordinary Convention Committee, as it is otherwise called. But what we can say, what we can insist upon, is internal democracy, not just within the APC, but in all the political parties. Because oftentimes, yes, you see these tendencies playing out. And what you are told that, oh, it's normal for politicians to quarrel and they will resolve it. But as we saw in the case of the PDP in 2014, 2015, such internal wranglings can have implications for the future of the party, for the potential of the party to achieve its objective. What is the main objective of a political party? To win elections. If you don't win elections, you are not a very serious or useful political party. And, the APC, all of them need to focus on this objective and realize that if they get too drunk on their own supply, it could have serious consequences, particularly now that they are not so popular within the, the country, and that they are not so popular in terms of the competition with the alternatives that Nigerians have at their disposal. As for the PDP governors, yes, 10 of them attended the meeting. And, okay, they've made all those points. The point that is out there, there are specific other points that they made in their communique. One of the points is about state policing. They say they disagree with the president about state policing. 2, they blame the federal government of Nigeria, as led by President Muhammadu Buhari, for the insecurity in parts of the country. And they do not think that those governors from the Northeast, the Yobe governor, by the way, the same Mai Mala Buni, who is saying, oh, you cannot sleep with your 2 eyes closed. They don't agree with them. 3, they are telling the National Assembly to override the veto of the president on the issue of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. And of course, they do not think that the administration is doing the best for Nigerians. In fact, they also raised the question of Twitter, the ban, the unbanning, or the adaptation of Twitter, as Garuba Shehu tried to put it. They say, no, this was an attack on the Nigerian youths who depend on it, not just for social interaction, but also for business. Okay, I align myself with the opposition to know that. What do you expect the opposition to say? We don't expect that governors of the opposition party will praise the government of today. So it's their job. In the same way, you don't expect Keir Starmer to come forward and say, oh, Boris Johnson is the best thing since the invention of toothpaste. But what we appeal, our appeal to the 2 parties, major parties in Nigeria, and to all the political parties is that, look, as we move towards the 2023 general elections, the interest of the people should be paramount. In this country, people pay lip service to public interest, national interest, but they don't mean it. And that they should realize that, look, internal democracy within the political parties will be a way of strengthening the process. There's too much selfishness around, too many masquerades going to the highway, in Nigerian politics. There's one singer who said, Egungun na highway you dey go, so
Egungun be careful.
Egungun be careful. Okay, but the carefulness in this regard should be about how Nigeria survives. I saw Bismarck Rawane yesterday. He told me something that I found very instructive. He said, in the politics of 2023, well, maybe he doesn't want me to quote him, but he said something that I found irresistible. He said, Nnamdi Azikiwe once said, that when it is election time like this, many people, rush out there. Everybody is pursuing his own objective. But some of them, they will have their legs broken even before the music starts. I think we are in that situation. Apologies to Bismarck Rawane in case I'm doing aproko on our private conversation. But I thought what he said, Nnamdi Azikiwe said, aptly describes this present situation.
Yeah, and I think it's those conversations on really what affects the people that we don't have enough of. Because you see, Nigeria is in a terrible time now as a country. We cannot run away from the facts. Only yesterday, amidst all of this politicking, the inflation rate that we all were celebrating was trending downwards has gone up again from 15.40% now to 15.63%. Food inflation jumped percentile of 1.23%. Core inflation increased. Core inflation is inflation characterized by when you make the summation of non-volatile agricultural products and the likes. That also increased. What does that tell you? Inflation is creeping back. At the same time, we're going to face headwinds this year. America is going to increase interest rates. It is said as we speak that debts of developing countries will triple. There's already a debt overhang for developing countries. So those are the conversations that the politicians need to have about the people, because it's going to be more suffering. And at some point, we have to remove subsidies. So those are the headwinds that are coming this year. And when you see politicians breaking their legs before they even start to dance, quoting the words of Dr. Abati and Abbas Obesere, Egungu, be careful, na express you they go. That's the case in Nigeria today.
It's a masquerades that are now collecting numbers.
Yes, what it means is that masquerades, be careful, you're going on the highway. That's all on News Headline. We'll take a short break. When we return, we'll have Rotu Sudiri, Michael Wilson, Adesso Amora, Aaron Akeja to give us updates on Africa, global business, COVID-19 and sporting activities across the globe. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Our dependable Rotu Sudiri is here to give us an African business update. Morning, Rotus.
Morning, Sundu. Good morning, Rufai. Good morning, Doctor. Rufai was already, touching on inflation before we went to break. Year on year, 15.63% in December. It was 15.4 in November. So since March of last year, we've had an 8-month deceleration in inflation. But unfortunately, that was snapped in December, and it kind of surprised analysts. It didn't surprise me, and it's unfortunate I didn't get to say this before, because now it looks like I'm, Monday morning quarterbacking. But I thought about the festive season, which had an increase in demand for food. This was driven by food, and honestly, it's not even the year-on-year figure that is the real story. The real story is month-on-month. In particular, so headline month-on-month, 1.82%. I think it was a 74 basis point climb from about 0.75 in the previous month. But food inflation on a month-on-month basis rose to 2.19% from 1.07% in November. That is an over 100 basis point climb. Yeah. It is the highest level that we've had in about 5 years. I think it was 2.54 in 2017. So there's a number of things here. One, there was an below average harvest season that we had, kind of spilled into December into some of the northern regions. You had, of course, the extra demand in the festive season for food, parties and so on and so forth, companies buying bags of rice and other oil and so on for their employees and so on. You had food disruption issues in parts of the country. That also contributed to it. Currency pressure, even on a year-on-year basis, if you think about what the naira was at last year till here, there's been a move, especially on the parallel market. And then security issues. So the insecurity, farm produce inflation, that's the cost there also rose as well. And you have to bring in the insecurity issue now is pretty much an economic issue, because without farmers being able to go to their farms, with kidnappings and the banditries in parts of the northern part, that is now really filtering into what we're seeing with these inflation numbers. So it's food that was the main driver. Will we see another increase in January? I mean, we'll have to wait to see what happens. I don't think so. Perhaps the deceleration will resume, and maybe it was a one-off. But as Rufai was mentioning, these things are starting to catch up. You mentioned core inflation as well. Look at cooking gas prices year on year. So this has been mainly a food story. We move to Ghana. Ghana's parliament is going to be resumed, and I'm sorry about these images, but this is what happened 3 weeks ago in parliament when they last debated that electronic levy. They've gone on recess, they're back now, and they're supposed to resume the debate on this electronic levy on mobile money. And I talked about this yesterday because this has been on for weeks now. Bloomberg wrote that article we talked about yesterday where bondholders of Ghana are worried about whether they can, refinance their debt. And this is an important revenue driver. But Akufo-Addo's party, which has a slim majority, has just held, really tough opposition, which some people are suspecting could be lobbying on the part of the mobile telecoms companies in Ghana that don't want to see the tax, and so they are possibly lobbying parliament members and keeping the opposition there. But this is how serious it was. It broke down into a fight about 3 weeks ago, and we're going to see whether or not they can negotiate. It's really sad to say adults do this, but you wonder if they can. These are politicians. They're supposed to be able to negotiate these things, and Ghana has serious revenue challenges, so I don't know where the opposition thinks they're going to get the revenue from. Anyway, finally, Uganda. Uganda has seen a 50% hike in fuel prices. Uganda is landlocked, so they get fuel in trucks from Kenya. I think it's the Mabala border is what it's called. That border, along with other border points, have seen, as you're seeing the images here, these trucks have all been lined up because of COVID tests. So Uganda needs fuel, but is it Museveni? The president, said that you can't come in until you've got a negative COVID test. They called this off. Because there were strikes and so on earlier this month. But the buildup has been so bad that it has reduced fuel supplies in Uganda. They're saying they will send health workers down there to try to get more tests done so they can clear the backlog. But it's pretty ugly. Doesn't this remind us of what happened between the UK and France in December 2020? The Dover ports in southeast England, where France closed their border, and trucks from the UK were stranded for days. So it's a repeat. This is the impact of COVID. That's our update.
I want to talk about Ghana. I mean, I don't understand how much of an imbecile you need to be if you think that abusing people will make them agree with you, because that's how it started. And then they decided, okay, if abusing you won't change your mind, I'll punch you in the face, and then you'll see my way. I mean, it's ridiculous. But what has really changed between December 21st and now? So what is the government really going to do here? Are they possibly considering some kind of compromise? I mean, what can they do at this point?
So the Bloomberg article and what's been happening with Ghana's bond yields, I think that should light a fire under the backsides of parliament members, because they've seen now that investors are watching and looking at them. So with Ghana having to rush out and put that press release we talked about yesterday and saying, oh look, things are not that bad, let's reassure investors. Hopefully that works. So hopefully they come back and the Akufo-Addo's party says, hey look, you've seen what happens with the international investors. You need to allow us to pass this bill. Maybe they'll reduce the amount of the tax and stagger it. But they need revenue, they need money. So hopefully that's spurs them into action.
But the reason in Ghana why a lot of people are complaining and looking at that is that the tax regime is already high enough in Ghana.
Correct.
It's really very high.
Right.
So that's why a lot of people are saying, okay, adding the e-levy to it will increase things. But the truth is, what would they rather do? Yeah. They are not making enough from crude oil that they discovered. Gold is not any better. Natural resource is not any better, and all of that. How can they?
They've already increased prices for cocoa. There are cocoa mafia thing they have with Ivory Coast.
They have to collect this taxation.
Right.
And the next best thing they can use is the digital economy. But is the price going to be reasonable? And I think that's a conversation on the particular rates and also on the profit and the collection targets. I think that's another thing we don't look at. Yeah. On the profit and the collection target, but definitely they need to collect those taxes because they're in dire straits. And what Bloomberg said is true. Real quickly, I want to go back to Nigeria, the inflation rate. I'm sure we're seeing this. And we have constantly deceived ourselves in this country. Oh, inflation is trending downward. While month on month
it has been going up.
Yep. Farm gate inflation is another big problem in this country. Because you see, once it leaves farm gates, the price becomes ridiculous. You can get it almost for trifles at farm gate. But the price at buying at farm gate has even increased. Another factor you should put in is the role of the middlemen.
Right.
The middlemen have helped to drive inflation as regards agricultural commodities in this country. Because now they have ticked up the price at farm gate. There's no time, Dr. Batia.
Okay, first, let me start with Ghana. Ghana has a parliament of 275 members of the House. And on the question of the e-levy bill, that parliament is divided down the middle. The entire country is also divided. And this fight is between the MPP and the NDC. That video you showed was the fight, the fisticuffs, on the floor of Parliament on December 21. The Ghanaian Parliament is going to reconvene today. There's no expectation that they will be able to reach a consensus, because it's not just a fight in Parliament, it's also a fight on the streets, because the 1.75% charge is on electronic transfers, on mobile money.
Yes.
So people are saying, look, I'm not going to pay any charge. Now, yesterday we talked about Bloomberg, and we talked about the press statement that was issued by the Ghanaian government, saying, look, all the fundamentals in the Ghanaian economy are in place, and Ghana does not have a revenue problem. But Fitch, the rating agency, has downgraded Ghana from B to B minus with a negative outlook. And Fitch is also saying, along the same lines with Bloomberg, that in fact Ghana cannot do any Eurobond in 2022 because it will have issues. Fitch is saying that, look, the domestic debt in Ghana is so high that it is discouraging to international investors. And that it is not true, as the Ghanaian authorities are arguing, that they don't have a revenue problem. Because in that statement, they were claiming, oh, we have significant revenue inflow. So the question for me is not about what they do in Ghana. The question for me is, what can we learn from what is going on in Ghana? Because here also, domestic debt is a big issue. Foreign debt is a big issue. What are the lessons that we can possibly draw from that? And then about inflation, 15.63, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Now, the explanation has been given that in December, this was due to higher demand because of the Yuletide season. Can we rely on that? What it means, clearly, is that for 2022, and you can benchmark this with the budget 2022 has proposed, is that there's greater uncertainty ahead for Nigerians. The headwinds are stronger than they have ever been. And if indeed, as the government is promising, that by July there will be an increase in the pump price of fuel, of PMS, of petrol, then of course the situation will get worse. Yeah. And then of course, if you check what happened yesterday with the Houthi movement attacking locations in the United Arab Emirates, and the international price, the spot price of fuel going up, then all of this will have implications as to how the Nigerian economy plays out, particularly as we've been told by the head of the NNPC, that the higher the spot price of fuel goes, the more problematic it is for Nigeria to balance certain fundamentals. So the outlook for this year, indeed, is frightening. Yeah. But unfortunately, it's common people like you and I that will bear the brunt, and that will be really unfortunate indeed. We're Tundu is looking like she's not affected. She's not affected. But we common people, we should be worried. So it's not about economics. It's not about MDS, providing rationalization. The reality is on the streets. Yeah. And that is why, the food sub-index is the most problematic part of it, as you pointed out. Yeah.
We all sink and swim together. Thank you, Roses, for your time this morning. Moving on to more business updates, Michael Wilson joins us now from London. Good morning.
Pacific markets really fairly quiet this morning, given that it was a quiet day on Wall Street yesterday because of the Martin Luther King holiday. But underlying this, global interest rates are beginning to climb on expectations of faster central bank tightening. In Japan, the Nikkei up about 1%. The Topic's up 0.5%. Bank of Japan revising its inflation forecast. There's a bit of history for you. Hasn't done that for a long time. Hong Kong index advanced very, very slightly. Shanghai Composite up very, very generally. However, with reference to what Ruben and I were talking about yesterday, President Xi Jinping has been saying, do you remember that they made medium-term money slightly cheaper yesterday, the Bank of China, People's Bank of China? President Xi cautioned against a rapid rise in interest rates that could derail the global economy as it recovers from the pandemic. He said, and I think this is the translation of it, if major economies slam on the brakes or take a U-turn in their monetary policies, there could be serious negative spillover. So that's really what we were reflecting on yesterday. Perhaps he watches the program. Who knows? Now, basically what's happening is that China is looking to big tech to keep it going. It's aiming for 10% of its gross domestic product to come from big tech, up from 7.8% as it stands at the moment. It's part of its 14th five-year plan. It can do that kind of thing. It highlights China's ambition really to get ahead in the new technology as it continues, as we know, its rivalry with the United States and semiconductors. Let's shift our attention to Australia, known as the lucky country to a lot of people. Actually, what we're seeing there is that consumers have been relatively shell-shocked as Omicron hits spending and growth. Measure of consumer sentiment fell almost 10% last week, its lowest since October 2020. Record numbers of new cases and rising deaths have seen households sharply limit their movements and spending on services. And of course, the need for isolation has kept a lot of people out of essential jobs. A warning from the World Bank. Here's something that we occasionally feature on this program. What they're saying now is the poorest countries face what they describe as an $11 billion surge in debt repayments. It's warning of a disorderly default from that, because of course what's happened is that the pandemic came along, conditions on debts were lifted for a little while, and now these countries are having to pay at a time of obviously pay it back when they can least afford it. US markets, I said it was fairly quiet yesterday. The futures tied to the Dow Jones up by about 33 points. It's a pretty shortened trading week, but as I was noting yesterday, it's right into the reporting season now. Bank of America, United Health, Netflix, Goldman Sachs, and we saw a little bit of that on Friday with Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase and Citigroup reporting on Friday. As far as the EU is concerned, the Russia-Ukraine crisis could spark a further surge, I should say, in European gas prices, topping last year's highs. It's a very tight gas market at the moment, and Ukraine is particularly hanging over the market or the crisis there, since Russia provides about 35% of Europe's gas, and it led to a massive gas crunch in Europe, has taken us into those kind of areas which we know about only, unfortunately, too well. And as it is, gas supplies apparently, according to one analyst, are lower than they normally are, even and notwithstanding what's happening as far as the Ukraine border is concerned. As far as the EU, let's stay with that. Fines for breaches of EU privacy 7 times up to $1.2 billion. It's all about EU data protection. It's called the GDPR law. All companies have had to deal with that. It's all about data protection and consumers in Europe having more control over their information. The problem is, there's a major headache about this normally. It's just like there is between the way that investors are looking at China. What on earth is going on there? And apparently there's now organizations don't really know what the relationship between the EU and the US is about data transfers and so on, which is a huge part of their joint economies. UK government is exploring what they describe as radical intervention in the power market. Well, we know what the government's trying to do. It's trying to save itself from a great deal of public criticism. But what they're actually thinking of is something called a temporary price stabilization mechanism, which would mean that energy companies get cheap loans from government to tide them through these very high prices. So it takes the high price impact off consumers, but, and this is the big but, of course, they would have to pay them back as soon as energy prices come down again. UK inflation, we get those figures tomorrow. I mention them today because we're heading, I think the world knows this, towards new highs in inflation, 30-year high we're expecting. I know you've just been talking about it as far as Nigeria is concerned on your programme, expected to be 5.2%. Now, the importance of these figures tomorrow is that they come, it's the last ones that actually the Monetary Policy Committee meeting on February the 3rd will be looking at when they make the decision whether or not to raise interest rates again. And finally, oil prices. Brent crude hit its 7-year high, growing demand optimism, easing concerns about Omicron and so on. 86.84 in Asian trade. Haven't seen that since October 2014 in a consistent way. And the latest bump also, this comes after Yemen's Houthi rebels claimed attacks in Abu Dhabi that triggered fuel tank shortages there. And United Arab Emirates are warning that people should avoid vital installations. That is the global view this morning.
Okay. All right, Michael, great one. What is Boris Johnson's government or Rishi Sunak really saying with this money is given to the energy companies? Because to a large extent, it's quite nebulous, that clause of, oh, when the energy price starts to stabilize, then they'll pay back. Then who pays for the shortfall? Is it going to be more taxes for the people? Because I don't seem to get what is happening. And secondly, I want to talk about World Bank having fears that developing nations will have to pay more in debt because most countries around the world, the dollar, for instance, America, increasing interest rates, most of our debt denominated in the dollar and thereabout. The effect on this struggling nations, these nations that can't even afford to buy vaccines, there's more problems for them.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that, once again, the World Bank sort of stating the obvious, really. I mean, we all knew this was going to happen. It's clear that poorer countries, once the pandemic relief systems have been wound down, we're still going to have to reconsider what they're going to do with their debt. I suspect what we'll see is a lot of restructuring about this and maybe a bit of balance, but that's really for the World Bank to deal with. We know that the World Bank and its partner, the IMF, are fairly tough when they've been handing out loans to countries, and now it's time for that restructuring to take place. I think it will be very difficult indeed. As will now this intervention in the UK energy markets is not guaranteed. It's a discussion which has now reached number 10 and number 11, i.e. the Chancellor and the Prime Minister in England, in the UK. The idea is that yes, they may get cheap loans, but of course the companies will have to pay them. It's a question of stretching that. It's probably like a sort of massive bridging loan, isn't it? Really, I think that what people are imagining is it will only last for a few months. I mean, they could be completely wrong here. You're quite right to highlight it. I think we should monitor it, quite honestly, because it's another hit to the UK taxpayer. And as we're going to see in April, these major caps now coming off energy prices, that's really when it's going to bite. So I think this crisis is going to be with us, at least in the UK, for a couple of months. But these rises in the cost of living are being reflected worldwide, aren't they? I mean, it's not just the UK. Everybody's suffering because of high energy prices. Everybody's suffering because higher prices because of supply chain disruption as well. So it's a worldwide problem, at least amongst the developing economies right now.
Okay, talking about the supply chain, let's start with the Houthi movement attacking the UAE. Is that likely to have an effect on the capacity of the OPEC Plus nations to meet their target of 400,000 additional barrels per day? And if that happens, what will be the implications for the very uneasy supply-demand equation that OPEC Plus has been trying to deal with? Particularly as the UAE, backed by Saudi Arabia, is also threatening that there could be reprisal attacks. That's the first one. The second one has to do with Xi Jinping. President Xi, yesterday addressing the World Economic Forum, made two critical points. He says common prosperity, the common prosperity we desire is not the same thing as egalitarianism. But at the same time, we've seen China cracking down on technology, education, and other businesses. So can we take his word for it? And then he was at the same time saying China is a good destination for international investors. Who wants to go to China where there is so much uncertainty, or perhaps it doesn't matter because of population, will international investment continue to go to China?
Okay, China first then. So there's a number of things going on there. First of all, we were noting figures out this morning showing that their population of younger people is actually decreasing. There are far too many older people there. So that's something that they're having to face. The size of families is getting smaller, and that's something which worries the Chinese considerably. Also, the overspill from the property sector problems at the moment, that's punching a big hole in Chinese economic prospects. What people are finding is now, I mean, there's a story going around this morning about somebody who bought an apartment from one of the property companies thinking it would be a good investment, and now it's just a burden around his neck. He's saying, just take it away from me, basically. So all these things are going on in a part of the economy we don't actually hear a great deal about. I don't know what common prosperity means. I thought it means that there's a sort of levelling up as far as income is concerned. And you're quite right, obviously, to highlight the sort of clamp down on tech and entrepreneurism in China. Honestly, I'm at a loss to understand what they think's going to happen. I think that common prosperity is something which we all ought to aim at, but clearly it's common for some and not common for others as far as China's concerned. As far as OPEC Plus is concerned, well, look, all it's done is, I mean, I think it's a little early to wonder about what's going to happen as far as the Houthi rebels and what they've done at the moment as far as that gas installation, the oil installation is concerned. What OPEC Plus have said is, yes, they continue to underline this increase of 400,000 barrels per day on a monthly basis. However, what they did say in their last meeting, as they did in their previous meeting, in the small print, to say, should it be necessary, then we will meet again. And they will have to take action if the oil price continues to rise. I suspect they probably will, because as I keep saying, it is a commodity like anything else. And the higher it rises, it may seem good news for those who depend upon its revenue. But if consumers revolt against it, then they will, and that'll be a worldwide problem for OPEC.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. For COVID-19 pandemic update, Adeso Amaro is here with us. Adeso, great to have you. Good morning.
Good morning, Rufai. Thank you. Great to see you. Good morning, Tundu, and good morning, Dr. Abati.
Morning, Adeso.
Morning, guys. Well, scientists are warning that we may be learning more Greek letters as the Omicron whirlwind practically is ensuring that it is not the last COVID-19 variant the world has to worry about. The Johns Hopkins University has the latest tally globally, and at the moment, about 330 million people have been infected 3 years into this pandemic so far, and more than 5.5 million people have died with the virus. Meanwhile, 9.6 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been administered. Here in Nigeria, the authorities continue to report a decline in COVID-19 cases, but what to look at is the deaths. The deaths have remained on a steady rise. In the last 24 hours, 249 cases were recorded. However, 7 COVID-19 related deaths were reported. Yesterday, there were 8 COVID-19 deaths reported. No vaccination data from the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory in the last 24 hours by the NPHCDA. However, the agency released its latest rankings of governors and their states' performance in the COVID-19 mass vaccination exercise across the country, which is projecting to, or which is supposed to see 50% of eligible targeted population vaccinated by the end of this month, 31st of January. Nasarawa and Jigawa continue their winning streaks according to the NPHCDA, vaccinating over 80% and 60% respectively. The agency also says Lagos, Taraba, Gombe and Adamawa states have now vaccinated 10% of half of their eligible population, while Anambra State, unfortunately, has moved backwards from 28th position to the 31st position. And away from Nigeria, nearly a month after the Sheba Medical Center, remember we talked about this report when it was first released, a month after that news that the Sheba Medical Center in Israel launched the first in the world study to test the efficacy of the Pfizer and Moderna fourth COVID-19 dose. Well, the hospital yesterday said that this booster was only partially effective in protecting against the Omicron strain. Now, the fourth dose, they say, is safe. It offers a 5-fold increase of antibodies or protection against severe disease after a week of vaccination. But it's not just good enough for the Omicron variant. The WHO had warned against repeating booster shots. The study report comes on a day the Israeli Health Ministry also announced it will shorten the mandatory isolation period for those who have tested positive for COVID-19 from 10 days to 5 days. It's something we're beginning to see in different countries. We've seen it in the US, in the UK, and some other countries shortening the isolation period from 10 days to 5 days. Now to Greece, where people over 60 who refuse to be vaccinated will pay a fine starting at 50 euros this month and then followed by a monthly fine of 100 euros after that. The health minister says the fines will be collected through the tax office and the money will be used to help fund state hospitals. A lot of attention is now being shifted to the unvaccinated in the society. And finally, even as cases surge in many countries, I can tell you for free that in China, one case is one too many. And the country continues to enforce extreme measures to curb the virus spread. Well, let me tell you about the latest extreme measure. Yesterday, Chinese health authorities urged citizens to stop ordering or receiving parcels from abroad. They claim that a case of Omicron in the capital, Beijing, came from a package received from Canada. Meanwhile, organizers of the Beijing Winter Olympics say only selected groups will be allowed. It did not say who the selected groups will be. They will be allowed to attend the games, but no fans from outside of China are being allowed at the event. Back to you guys.
That's rich coming from China, I have to say. But it's an important reminder that the virus can survive on surfaces, depending on how porous those surfaces are, for up to 5 days. It's important to all remember that. As for Greece, fantastic news. It's about time people really all stop being coddled for their intransigence. We talked about this yesterday at Isra. And I'm really in support of this move away from this seemingly endless patience with these people who are determined to kill themselves and other people. Their freedom to die should not interfere with others' freedom to live. They ought to be fined. This is a fantastic idea. And the fact that it's going to be used, the fines will be used to fund state hospitals also makes perfect sense. I mean, if you insist on being such a liability, then you should pay for that privilege. But it also has to be said that it should be extended, I think, not just to the elderly, so that it's not some kind of ageist stigmatization of a particular demographic. I think it should be extended to all demographics who are just insistent on being obtuse when it comes to the obvious science in support of vaccination. I can't believe that we still have this movement, yet here we are. And on the Israel study, well, the science is important, and I think this backs up the WHO, who have always queried the use of boosters and have showed that it's quite pointless. I actually know somebody personally who has 4 COVID jabs and still got Omicron, I think twice got Omicron. So really, it's really of no effect. So it's important, not just like anecdotal evidence that you hear from people you know. It's important that we actually have science that backs that. But will governments actually follow the science? Because COVID is so politicized. That whole roll out the boosters and what have you was not backed by science, but it was, resorted to. The travel bans with Omicron weren't backed by science. This Operation Red Meat that they're calling it in the UK, which is such a disgusting term. We used to hear that a lot under President Trump, giving red meat to his base to fire up his base. It's a cynical manipulation of your electorate. The fact that Boris Johnson has been reported to consider dropping all COVID rules to distract from his Downing Street, Downing drinks debacle. They just don't follow the science. So I don't know what the practical use of this study actually is, although thank you for sharing it. For some of us, science is important.
Greece, let me start with Greece. Greece first announced this vaccine mandate for persons over 60 years in December, targeting about 530,000 people. Now, since then, about 41.5% of that population has more or less rushed to get vaccinated. But the major problem that Greece still faces is that its national average is below the European Union average of 70%. And in recent times, there have been cases of increase in Omicron variants in Greece. And so Greece is now saying that with effect from February 1, that's the date that has been attached to it, you will pay 50 euros if you are over 60 and you are not vaccinated. And in subsequent months, you will pay 100 euros. So the whole idea is to get the remaining population of, out of that 530,000 people who are not yet vaccinated to go and get vaccinated. And why the target? Why the focus, rather, on persons who are over 60%? Well, Greece seems to have an older population. It has the 7th largest older population in the world, according to the US Population Reference Bureau. So what they are doing in Greece is to make sure that people just get vaccinated, particularly as in other parts of Europe, there are issues in terms of the figures going up. In Poland, for example, has entered the 5th wave, with very high figures of over 200,000 per day. And we're told that it could even get worse. With regard to the Israel study at the Sheba Hospital, the persons that were involved in that sample, about 270 of them, all of them are taking either the Pfizer, BioNTech, or the Moderna vaccine previously.
Moderna.
But it was discovered that, look, when they take the booster shot, the antibodies level will increase, but it is no protection against the Omicron variant. That is the main piece of that study. And what is now being considered is that, well, whether you take a booster shot or not, it probably will not make a difference with regard to Omicron. But the good news is that Pfizer, weeks ago, already announced that it was already working on an Omicron-specific, vaccine. And Pfizer has promised March. When that is done, when that is tested, maybe perhaps it will make a difference. As for China, China has a zero COVID policy. But even in spite of that, in Beijing and other places, cases have been reported. And China is now saying that the Winter Olympics that is scheduled to begin on February 4, in addition to the other protocols, guidelines that you already articulated in your presentation, that, look, tickets will not be sold. Only targeted groups will be invited to the events. Well, who those targeted persons will be, either from Tianjin, where they are recording very high figures, or in Shenzhen, this will be determined over time. But as for the importation of COVID into China, yes, China continues to push that line on a nationalistic line. But the scientists there are saying that is not true, that COVID is airborne and it's not about surfaces. And that even when you bring anything from abroad, all you need to do is to clean it and you are good. But China, the authorities are insisting that the latest reported case of Omicron in Beijing was associated with a product that came from Canada, from abroad. And that's why they are insisting. So you have the politicians on one side, you have science, the scientific experts on the other side.